Let's bring you some other news on the programme now, because this Monday, the French President Emmanuel Macron is in Kenya for a trip focused primarily on investment and on trade. He's co-hosting the Africa Forward Summit with his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto. About 30 of the continent's leaders are also attending. You can see them in the footage there. And for a French president, such a foray into an Anglophone African country is rather unusual. France having historically closer ties naturally to its former colonies in West Africa, but those relationships have come under significant strain in recent years. Well, to talk then about how France is trying to build new relations with English-speaking parts of the continent, Douglas Yates with me here in the studio. He's a professor of international relations and African politics at the American Graduate School here in Paris. Hello to you.
Hello, Nadia.
Very pleased to have you on set to talk about this. Look, France's ties with its former African colonies, places like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they have come under huge strain, haven't they, in recent years? We've seen security partnerships coming to an end, Russia as a kind of growing influence in those countries. So how much is this conference today that France is organising a bid to sort of redress that balance and build new relationships in Africa?
Yeah, the optics are very clearly, this is supposed to represent a demarcation point where France is no longer just speaking to former French colonies. If we look at Macron, he spent the decade starting at first trying to address the grievances in these former colonies against France and saying, we're sorry, and there was a total rejection of that. Whatever he said, the people weren't happy, it wasn't enough. Returning African art and trying to address the grievances of the past. And so gradually, he started to change his discourse to, well, we'll find new partners. In fact, we want to deal with all of the African continent, and we make a great intermediary. So French business was already doing that. They were already in Angola for the oil. They were already opening up the Franc zone to non-French members like Equatorial Guinea. And they were picking and choosing countries that spoke French but weren't necessarily part of French African colony like Democratic Republic of Congo or Rwanda. So there's been a long-term trend that maybe you could treat this as the culmination of. Now, finally, instead of the France-African gathering of kleptocrats and gerontocrats, he's there with people from all over the continent saying France wants to do business and we're not trapped by the past.
Right, and why Kenya specifically as the country to host this? Yeah,
so it probably seems more obvious in the Anglophone world than it does in the Francophone world. Kenya, first of all, is a democracy. Not a perfect democracy, but not a hybrid democracy, so it's frequentable. One of the problems Macron has is because he has a human rights discourse and a democracy discourse, he has a hard time dealing with overt dictators. So Kenya has elections. It's never had military rule. Second, Kenya's got this strategic relation with the East African community. France had no colonies in East Africa. It had Djibouti in the Horn and it had Madagascar in the south. So there's this vast area strategically in the Indian Ocean where a partnership with Kenya will allow France to land on its feet. Like France right now is moving an aircraft carrier through the Red Sea. It's going to pass by Djibouti at the Horn, but after that, it has nothing. So Kenya gives it a base to launch operations in the Sahel, operations that used to be run from the Sahel, and it's a reliable military partner.
Right, and those military partnerships is something that Kenya apparently wants to do more of. It signed a military partnership deal with France last year, but it also has signed deals with China, with Italy, even with the Czech Republic.
Yeah, so the African leaders are not naive. They understand exactly what these efforts are by China, by France, by the United States. And so they've all adopted a strategy of distributing their dependency. If you look at the faces on this group photo from Kenya, you'll see those same people in FOCAC in China, the big Chinese gathering every year. You'll see some of them, if Keir Starmer decides to play the Commonwealth card, going to a Commonwealth summit. So attending summits gives African leaders a chance to tell their people, look, I'm an important person in international relations, and it gives them a chance to cut deals, particularly for resources and trade, with important actors of the OECD.
And can we just go back then to France and West Africa, those former colonies? I mean, on the programme over the last few weeks, we've talked a lot about Mali, where we've seen this surprise insurgency by jihadists mixed with rebel groups pushing up against the Malian army. France hasn't said very much about that. It hasn't been particularly involved. Does that say to you that really, as it's trying to build these bridges with East Africa, with Anglophone Africa, that really its relationship with those former colonies is, I mean, it's dead now?
All right, so I think that the optics do look like that. So my own view on this is that France has very long-term relations with Francophone Africa that will not go away.
Okay.
But in the short term, it's not so much Mali as the military junta of Mali. It's not
This
so much
particular one.
Niger, but the military junta of Niger. The military juntas of these countries have thrown their support to Russia on the hope that Russia can help them solve their security crisis and cut them endless amounts of slack for their failure to hold elections, which France couldn't. But I think they've made a bad bet, and Mali's an excellent example. The Russian troops were literally escorted out of the Kidal by the rebels. Russia's not in a position to win that war. France did have a successful military strategy by heavily investing during Francois Hollande's presidency. Russia's not willing to do that. They're just pillaging gold and having mercenaries there. So I think that those military junta will have a day of reckoning. And when that day comes, France is the logical partner, linguistically, culturally, strategically. China's far away. They don't speak Chinese there. They speak French.
So you think actually the relationship, turbulent as it is now, with those former colonies, it will survive?
That's right. Now, by the way, I could always be wrong, but what I'm using is history as my guide. There was a previous time when Mali was very anti-French and pro-Russian during the Cold War. And then you saw, when the end of the Cold War came and Russia abandoned all of its allies, France returned to actually liberate Mali from jihadist terrorists. I think the problem in Mali is not Franco-African relations. It's that the country of Mali isn't unified, that there is a north, there is Azawad, there are Tuareg people who have an unrelenting demand for independence. And until Bamako deals with that, it doesn't matter what foreign power they're dealing with.
All right, really interesting. Thanks so much for your analysis. Douglas Yates for us there.